Hello, everyone. You all have been asking some really interesting questions about spatial thinking, the definition of geography, the range of geography, and I wanted to touch back with that and just spend a few more minutes talking specifically about spatial thinking and the range of geography. So, excuse me. First of all, everyone can do spatial thinking. For a while, people thought that men were better at spatial thinking than women because going back to ancient human beginnings, men were the ones that were out doing the hunting on the plains and the savannah, and women were the ones that were, close to home and hunting and gathering. And we now know that that is not true. Everybody was doing hunting and gathering, and human brains are human brains, and men and women are equally good at spatial thinking. There's all sorts of different kinds of spatial thinking. I know you can do spatial thinking because you can navigate through a room and you can get dressed in the morning. You can find your way to a job or to school. So moving through space is one kind of spatial thinking. And kids pick this up very early. It's an innate human thing. For example, this is a drawing that one of my nephews made when he was about 3.5. Can you tell what he's doing, what they had just done? They had been at a water park. So you can see him and his brothers, even though his little baby brother was only a 1 and was not on the slide. But here's the staircase up to the slide, there's the slide, and it ends in a pool. Now, does he have the relationship in space entirely accurate? No, right? He was 3.5. But he understood the relationship between going up a ladder, down a slide, and landing somewhere else. So everyone can do spatial thinking. It is also something that we learn and get better at with practice. So why do we want to do this? Why do we want to use geography? Why do we want to use spatial thinking? Well, where and why matters. Humans operate in space, and one of the ways that we organize our lives and think about our world is where we were when things happened to us. Where matters. So for many of your grandparents' age, for example, a question that shows this is, where were you when Kennedy was shot? For people maybe your parents' age or my age, a really important where question is, where were you on 9/11? But it doesn't have to be just serious things that we put in space. It can be things like, where were you when you got your first kiss? But humans place themselves in locations, in places. So why geography just overall? Why do I think everyone should take it, and why is it so handy, and how does it help us? Well, since the things that we do exist in space, and things vary from location to location, from place to place, cultures, resources, economic activities. Where I grew up, there was not a lot of corn and Milo being grown. It was oranges and strawberries and things like that, things that don't necessarily grow very well in Kansas. So we know that human activities vary from place to place. We organize ourselves in space. So understanding that and being able to look at the world around you and analyze those patterns is really important. It helps you understand yourself and your world. Geography not only helps us understand that, but the people, the cultures, the way that the world functions. So that's some of the reasons that geography is so important. It also helps us solve problems. Things like how, given the fact that the Taliban took over in Afghanistan very quickly, how do we get people out that need to be evacuated? Geography of moving people, of transportation, of trying to figure out how to get them to a safe place, all of those are geographic questions. So is what this picture at the bottom represents, which is a walkable city, a place where there's a lot of more green space, and people are interacting more on the streets. We aren't isolated in our cars. Geography helps us solve those problems as well. So geography is handy in many ways. We also use spatial language and thinking all the time, whether we realize it or not. All the things that we consider prepositions. Remember in school you might have learned that a preposition is what the squirrel does to a tree. Well, all of that is spatial language. Up, down, beyond, underneath, right? Whatever the squirrel can do running around the tree, all of that is spatial language. So we use that all the time. Okay? Some questions that geographers ask and that reflect this kind of spatial thinking is, again, where questions. Where are things located on Earth? Why are they located there? How do places differ from one another? How is Emporia different than Lawrence? How is Lawrence different than New York City? How is New York City different than Djibouti? All of those are the awareness that places differ from each other. They have different patterns. They have different physical geography, cultural geography, and we can look at those patterns and compare and contrast. We also look at how people interact with their location. That is a spatial question as well. Did they chop down all the trees? Did they build a dam? Are they building a house that has stilts because they know that this area is going to flood and so they don't want to lose their house? So we interact with the locations, with the environments that we live in a variety of different ways. There is a short reading in the links on this page about spatial thinking and asking geographic questions. So that will also help you pin this down and get better at it and practice with it, which we will be doing all semester long. Let's look at spatial thinking in a slightly different way for a minute. Okay, so let's think about cats. A bunch of us are all sorts of different disciplines. We are taking classes and have a major that's all over campus. So think about your major and your discipline and how that discipline might study cats, their behavior, whatever it is about a cat. How might people in your discipline do that? So take a minute to think about that. All right. So, well, if you are a biologist or you are going to be a vet, you would be interested in the internal anatomy of a cat. Right? You would want to know more about that. Someone who is a sociologist might want to look at cats as comfort animals or companion animals for children who've been through trauma or are in a new foster situation. Does having a pet help ease transitions? So that would be a different way of interacting with what a cat is and how it would apply to your discipline. An economist or an accountant might want to know what it costs to keep a cat and who can afford it, and do people plan ahead for this, or do people find themselves in debt because they get a pet? Someone who is computer science, those of you who are, you might have been thinking we don't do cats, right? We don't interact with cats. Well, you may. You may be part of a project that is helping design robotic companion animals for people who have allergies, right? Maybe it's something like that. So there's all sorts of different ways that different disciplines would view the same thing, a cat. Right? All sorts of different approaches. Geographers would think about cats in space. We would use spatial thinking. What locations they live in, how they move through areas. For example, there's a geographer who had a cat and was curious what the cat did at night. So the geographer attached a GPS tracker to the cat's collar and tracked the cat at night and then mapped it, put it over a picture of the world. Right? So here's one cat's path. Here is another path. Look at that. The cat had a pretty good range here. I want to know what these buildings are. Right? What was so attractive about them? This one's my favorite, though. This is an adventure cat. It goes up into the foothills. So that tells us something about cats because it gives us more information about their habits, about how far they can go. It leads to more information and a better understanding of cats. More spatial thinking than a geographer might do. Their cats' impact on the local environment. Cats can kill small animals and birds, and that can have a very serious impact on the environment. Here, for example, Australia, most of Australia, almost 100% of Australia now has feral cats. And how is that impacting the wildlife? That is a spatial question that geographers could inquire into. Okay? You could also map where the cat and dog population is, for example. And you can see variation. The Upper West Side and the Upper East Side, those are places that people have a fair amount of money, and more people have pets. Areas up here with Harlem, where there are there's a larger percent of the population that has less money, you might have fewer pets. Right? So we can gain all sorts of understanding about pets and their relationship with humans by looking at things spatially. Two other really quick examples. Okay? Spatial thinking helping us understand the world. This area here in Minnesota and Wisconsin is an area where we have a huge percentage of the population that has Scandinavian ancestry. Why? Why did they arrive and settle in this part of the United States? Well, if we look at the geography, if we look at it spatially, we can understand. Because they were arriving here in New York, for the most part, in the mid-1800s, and they arrived and all of this land was already settled. So they continued pushing to the west, and they looked for a place that they were familiar with, that had a similar climate, that they knew what to deal with. They knew how to deal with cold winters and how to farm in those areas and how to build houses, and it helped them not feel so homesick to have cold weather. So they were much more interested in settling up here in the north, in Minnesota, than they would have been in, say, Louisiana or Texas. And so we have this huge concentration of Scandinavians in that area. All right, one last example, Kansas being at the crossroads of marijuana trafficking. Why? Well, if we look at it spatially, Kansas is at the crossroads of two of the most important interstates in the entire country, I-70 moving east and west, and I-35 north and south. And so having that crossroads means that marijuana can be moved through these areas with ease. We also are right here surrounded by states where there are more flexible rules about marijuana use. Colorado, of course, and New Mexico, it is completely legal. And then there is this north-south line of states where it's legal for medical use. And so it's easily accessible. People can go get it and bring it back. There's a lot of reasons that there is a lot of marijuana in Kansas. All right, so that is a bit more about spatial thinking, about the kinds of questions we ask, and about how it can help us understand the world and solve problems. Let me know what questions you have, and I'll talk to you guys soon.